The
children of Congo have been dying for years. Several other conflicts, such as in Sudan, exist on the continent. We would have liked to see the African Union generate the strength and all the strategies necessary to support its states so that they can find peace. We will not even talk about us here in the Sahel. For nearly 10 years, the Sahel has been the scene of international terrorism. But we see no support from these organizations to find a solution to this problem. Worse, a few days ago, a foreign country in Africa openly announced that it had supported and participated in a cowardly, terrorist, and barbaric attack against the forces of our confederation. The African Union did not say a word to condemn this interference. The African Union did not say a word to condemn this interference of a foreign state in Africa in the internal affairs of our states. I would like them to hear this shout and get out of their silence and take action so that the youth can believe in the African Union.
Now, before we continue with this bold speech from Captain Ibrahim Traore, it is crucial to fully grasp the dire situation unfolding in the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC. This is not just a localized conflict. It is a geopolitical crisis with deep historical roots, fueled by ethnic tensions, foreign interference, and the relentless struggle for control over the region's vast mineral wealth. In recent weeks, M23 has made alarming territorial gains along the Rwandan border, effectively encircling Goma, the provincial capital, and a vital hub for both security operations and humanitarian aid. With a population of roughly 2 million, Goma now stands at the epicenter of this conflict, as fears of a full-scale invasion grow. The DRC government, the United States, and UN experts have all pointed fingers at Rwanda, accusing its military of directly backing M23 rebels. According to intelligence reports and satellite imagery, Rwanda is alleged to be providing arms, training, and logistical support to the group, enabling it to launch large-scale offensives. M23 is primarily composed of ethnic Tutsis who originally defected from the Congolese army over a decade ago. This ethnic component is significant because it ties the group to historical conflicts in the Great Lakes region, particularly Rwanda's own internal and cross-border interests. However, Kigali has adamantly denied all accusations, dismissing them as baseless and politically motivated. This is not just an ethnic or political conflict. It is also a war over resources. Eastern Congo is home to some of the world's most valuable minerals, including cobalt, gold, tin, tungsten and coltan, a crucial component in electronic devices. Control over these resources has made the region a battleground for nearly 100 armed groups, each seeking to exploit Congo's wealth for its own gain. Many analysts argue that foreign interests, including multinational corporations and neighbouring states, have long played a role in fueling instability to maintain access to these resources. Rwanda denies all involvement. The DRC, the US and the UN claim otherwise. The question we must ask ourselves is, who has the most to gain from this war? Is this merely a proxy conflict with global superpowers silently manoeuvring behind the scenes? And more importantly, what is the solution? To gain a clearer perspective on the complexity of the DRC crisis, I will now play a crucial video featuring Professor P.L.O Lumumba, a distinguished Pan-Africanist and Kenyan lawyer. Known for his sharp political analysis, Professor Lumumba will provide a historical and geopolitical breakdown of Congo's struggles, shedding light on the hidden forces at play and the implications for Africa as a whole.
The conflict that is pitting Congo, some say that the Rwandese are involved because the people that are fighting as M23 are of Tutsi stock, but they are Congolese. They come from around Kivu. The fact that a boundary was drawn by the colonialists and put them in a country that is now known as DRC, at one time was known as Zaire or Congo Kinshasa, does not make them Rwandese. So the M23 was formed deliberately because the people who are then christened as the Banyamulenge thought that they were being discriminated against. They thought that the Congolese administration in Kinshasa was telling them to go to Rwanda, which is not their country. And this is something that has been debated over time. In 1996, when the country was still known as Zaire, the former president of Tanzania, the late Julius Kambarage Nyerere, in 1996, when delivering a speech in New York under the Peace Academy, said that we must be very clear that the Banyamulenge are not Rwandese. The Banyamulenge or the Tutsi who are to be found or who are found in Kivu are Congolese. Because the colonialist border put them in DRC, Congo, and some in Tutsi, does not make them Rwandese. So the M23 was created deliberately for the purpose of protecting the interests of the Tutsis who are Congolese citizens. However, it must be understood that there have been accusations and counter-accusations, with the administration in Kinshasa saying that the Rwanda administration is aiding the M23. Rwanda, on her part, has said that because the war spills over into Rwanda occasionally, they are always on a defensive and sometimes in an offensive mode. And you will remember that when Felix Tshisekedi took over power, there was a time indeed when he visited Kigali and gave the Rwandese the right to move into the territory of Congo to deal with other rebel groups which were a threat to Rwanda, in the same way that he also did to the Ugandans. The fallout now is that diplomatically there is now a problem between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the accusations are that the Rwandese administration is using M23 to destabilize DRC and also to take resources. But I believe that if we are to look at the issue in an objective manner, this is not the time to apportion blame. This is the time to ask ourselves, how can we stabilize that area? And that will require, among other things, that all the combatants are called to a round table. The argument, for example, that comes from the Kinshasa administration that they cannot have a face-to-face meeting with M23 is without merit, because it is the M23 who are on the ground, and they are an organized force with a clear chain of command. Even if it is true that the Rwanda government has given them logistical support, that does not take away the fact that they are organized and that they say they are Congolese. And we will remember that numerous attempts have been made to stabilize DRC. Numerous attempts when it was still called Zaire, numerous attempts when it changed its name to the Democratic Republic of Congo, and there have been peace initiatives, the most prominent of which has been the peace initiative by President João Lourenço of Angola, which appears to have faltered. There was also the Nairobi peace initiative, and we will remember that at one time all the East African countries did sanction an African force to go and help the Congolese administration, and they expelled the East African force and invited SADC. It must be remembered that DRC is a member of 2 regional organizations, perhaps even 3. But the most prominent are that they are members of the East African community and members of SADC. And as we speak now in the year 2025, it is the SADC forces that are prominent in that area. Internationally, we also have the UN, MONUSCO, which has been there for a very long time. And this is not the first time that M23 have actually invaded Goma and occupied Goma. There was a time when they did. But the things have escalated in a manner that was unprecedented, with the consequence that the Kinshasa administration severed diplomatic ties and asked that the Rwandese ambassador winds up their diplomatic activities within 48 hours. It is in that context that the Kenyan President William Ruto, who is the current chair of the East African Community, then said, let us have an urgent meeting in order to resolve the problem. But from where I sit, such an urgent meeting will only be to stabilize and possibly call for a truce. But we've got to look at the long-term issues. I know others outside of the continent have also offered to mediate. President Erdogan of Turkey did offer to mediate, and that was immediately dismissed by the Congolese, which begs the question, how do we deal with the Congo problem in the context of the combatants who are present and who have demonstrated that they have sufficient firepower to overwhelm the Congolese forces? We talk much more about M23 and also talk about Banyamulenge, but remember that researchers tell us that there are anything between 100 and 120 armed groups, some of which are mercenaries and are involved with miners from different parts of the world. So that even if you negotiated with M23, what do you do with the other armed forces? From where I sit, and there are people who share the view that I take, you need a thorough examination of the situation in Congo. You need to have a conference which is an all-party meeting to look at mediation of the conflict in a proper manner. And I am of the view that all heads of state in East Africa should congregate. All heads of state in SADC should congregate. And perhaps if the AU was a strong body, it is not. This would be done under the aegis of the AU, so that you don't have single mediators. In order to underscore the significance of the situation or the gravity of the situation, heads of state should do the initial heavy lifting, with certain guarantees being demanded of the parties involved. Short of that, we are in danger of having an all-out war in the same manner that we had in 1996 and 1997, when we had what was called the First Congo War and Africa's First World War. And we then had a similar one in 2001, 2003. So there is wisdom in this thing happening. I hope that on the 29th day of January 2025, the initial meeting between President Tshisekedi and President Kagame, and in the presence of other heads of state, will break the ice, because breaking the ice will then ensure that we have a path towards which lasting peace can be realized and certain accommodations being made. Finally, it is important to point out that it is unwise for African leaders to use colonially created and inherited boundaries as a basis for shutting out populations. One of the reasons why in 1963 in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and in 1964 in Cairo, Egypt, it was agreed to retain the boundaries was not because we wanted to use them as paddocks to discriminate, but because it was thought that trying to recreate them would cause chaos. it was also understood that they'll only be useful for purposes of administration. It cannot be right that we are talking about African unity, we are talking about free movement of persons, and then we begin to say that some are Congolese, some are Rwandese, some are Burundians. I hope and pray that those who for the time being are in positions of leadership in the DRC will recognize and see the big picture and negotiate. The stance that they have taken that they are not going to negotiate with M23 is, in my view, self-defeating.
Anyway, what are your thoughts on the escalating situation in Congo? Kindly hit the subscribing button and give us your thoughts on the comments section below.